My name is Emma, and I'm 29 now, but this story begins when I was just 15 years old, standing alone in LAX with nothing but a backpack and the crushing realization that my own mother had just abandoned me for a luxury cruise with her new husband, Derek. What I thought was going to be a family vacation turned into the moment that would define the next 14 years of my life and ultimately lead to the most satisfying revenge I never saw coming. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, but karma has a funny way of keeping score. Hey everyone! Before we dive into this wild family drama that literally changed my entire life, I'm curious, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate karma hits you as hard as it hit me to live through it, smash that like button and subscribe because trust me, you're going to want to see how this revenge story unfolds. The twist at the end will absolutely blow your mind, and I can't wait to share every shocking detail with you. Let's get into it. To understand how devastating that moment at the airport was, you need to know the full backstory of how my mother Linda systematically chose her new life over her own daughter. It started 3 years earlier when my dad passed away from cancer. I was only 12, and my mom was 38, suddenly a widow with a daughter to raise alone. For the first year after Dad's death, we were incredibly close. She'd tell me I was her partner in crime, and that we'd get through everything together. I believed her completely. But then Derek entered the picture. He was everything my dad wasn't: flashy, wealthy, and completely self-centered. Derek owned a chain of luxury car dealerships and lived in a massive house in Beverly Hills. When Mom started dating him, she began changing almost immediately. The woman who used to make me pancakes every Sunday morning and help with my homework suddenly became obsessed with fitting into Derek's world of country club dinners and expensive vacations. The red flags started small. Mom would cancel our movie nights because Derek wanted to take her to some exclusive restaurant. She'd skip my school events because Derek had tickets to premieres or galas. When I tried to talk to her about feeling left out, she'd brush me off with promises that things would settle down soon and that Derek was just showing her how to live again. But things never settled down, they only got worse. Derek made it clear from the beginning that he saw me as baggage. He never said it directly, but the way he'd sigh when I entered a room, or how he'd suggest adult time whenever I tried to join their conversations, spoke volumes. He'd make comments about how independent kids should be these days, and how his ex-wife's kids from her first marriage lived with their father full-time. Mom would laugh along, not realizing, or maybe not caring, that he was essentially saying I was in the way. The wedding happened exactly 2 years after they started dating. I wasn't asked to be in the wedding party. Instead, Derek's nieces, whom he barely spoke to, were chosen as bridesmaids. I sat in the back row like a distant relative, watching my mother pledge her life to a man who clearly wished I didn't exist. During the reception, Derek made a toast about new beginnings and leaving the past behind to embrace the future. The way he looked at me during that speech made my stomach turn. After the wedding, they moved into Derek's mansion, and I was given what used to be his home office, the smallest room in the house, tucked away in a corner where I wouldn't disturb their newlywed bliss. My old bedroom furniture looked ridiculous in the sterile, beige space, but Mom said I should be grateful for such a nice house. Derek installed a home theater, wine cellar, and gym, but when I asked about getting a desk for homework, he said the kitchen table was perfectly adequate for studying. The isolation became suffocating. Derek would plan elaborate trips for just him and Mom, always with excuses for why I couldn't come. This resort doesn't allow children, or you'd be bored at a wine-tasting tour, or my personal favorite, you need to focus on school instead of vacation. Meanwhile, Mom would come back from these trips glowing and full of stories about 5-star restaurants and private yacht excursions, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her teenage daughter was spending weekends alone eating cereal for dinner. School became my only refuge, but even that was tainted by Derek's influence. When I made honor roll, Mom was too busy planning their next getaway to notice. When I won a creative writing contest, Derek commented that artistic pursuits don't pay the bills and suggested I focus on practical skills instead. Mom just nodded along, the woman who used to frame every drawing I made in elementary school, now dismissing my achievements like they were meaningless. The worst part was watching Mom transform into someone I didn't recognize. She started getting Botox and expensive haircuts, wearing designer clothes that Derek picked out, and adopting his opinions on everything from politics to parenting. When I'd remind her of things we used to do together, she'd look at me with this blank expression, as if our shared memories were from someone else's life. Derek had effectively erased the mother I knew and replaced her with a trophy wife who saw me as a reminder of her old life. Friends at school started noticing the change in our family dynamic. When other parents would ask about my mom at school events, I'd make excuses for why she wasn't there. The truth was too humiliating, that my own mother preferred her new husband's world to her daughter's life. I started declining invitations to friends' houses because I was too embarrassed to reciprocate. How could I explain that my mom's new husband had turned our home into his personal sanctuary where I was merely tolerated? The breaking point came during my sophomore year when I got sick with mono and had to miss 2 weeks of school. Instead of taking care of me, Mom hired a nurse and went on a spontaneous trip to Napa with Derek because the weather was perfect for wine country. I spent those 2 weeks alone with a stranger, realizing that my mother had officially prioritized her new life over her sick child. That's when I knew something had to change, but I never imagined how dramatically it would happen. 3 months before my 15th birthday, something unprecedented happened. Mom actually seemed to remember she had a daughter. She knocked on my bedroom door one evening with an excitement I hadn't seen directed toward me in years. "Emma, honey," she said, practically bouncing on her heels, "Derek and I have been talking, and we want to take you somewhere special for your birthday. How would you like to go on a cruise to the Caribbean?" I was stunned. After nearly 2 years of being systematically excluded from their lives, they were suddenly inviting me on what sounded like an amazing vacation. Mom went on to describe this luxury cruise ship with rock-climbing walls, multiple restaurants, and even a teen club where I could meet other kids my age. For the first time in forever, I felt like maybe Derek was finally accepting me as part of their family, and Mom was remembering what it meant to be my mother. "Really?" I asked, not quite believing what I was hearing. "All 3 of us are going together." "Absolutely," Mom said, sitting on my bed and squeezing my hand. "We know things have been different since Derek and I got married. This is our chance to become a real family. Derek specifically said he wanted you to come because you've been such a good sport about everything." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Mom took me shopping for cruise clothes, buying me sundresses, swimsuits, and even a fancy outfit for the formal dining nights. Derek actually engaged in conversations about the cruise, showing me pictures of the ship online and talking about the different islands we'd visit. For the first time since he'd entered our lives, he seemed genuinely interested in including me in something. I started researching everything about Caribbean cruises. I made lists of excursions I wanted to try, restaurants I wanted to eat at, and activities I was most excited about. I even researched the teen club, hoping I might finally make some friends who understood what it was like to feel like an outsider in your own family. The anticipation was intoxicating. I hadn't felt this hopeful about our family dynamic in years. Mom helped me pack my suitcase, and we actually had fun doing it together. She'd hold up different outfits and ask my opinion, just like we used to do before Derek came along. We laughed about how much sunscreen to bring and whether I'd be brave enough to try the ship's zipline. For those precious few hours, I had my mom back, and I thought maybe this cruise would be the reset our relationship desperately needed. Derek even contributed to the preparation in ways that shocked me. He bought me a new camera so I could take pictures of our trip, saying he wanted me to document our first real family vacation together. He showed me how to use all the settings and made me promise to take lots of photos so we could make an album when we got back. The gesture felt so genuine that I started to wonder if I'd been too harsh in my judgment of him. The night before we were supposed to leave, Mom came into my room to say goodnight. She sat on the edge of my bed and brushed my hair back from my face, something she hadn't done since I was little. "I'm so excited for tomorrow," she said. "I think this trip is exactly what our family needs. Derek and I both realize we haven't been as attentive as we should have been, and we want to change that." I went to sleep that night more excited than I'd been in years. I dreamed about swimming in crystal-clear Caribbean waters, eating fancy dinners with Mom and Derek, and finally feeling like I belonged somewhere. I woke up early, double-checked my packed suitcase, and practically bounced around the house waiting for it to be time to leave for the airport. During the drive to LAX, the conversation was lighter than it had been in our family for months. Derek was actually asking me questions about school and my interests, while Mom was talking about all the mother-daughter activities we could do on the ship. They seemed genuinely excited to spend time with me, and I allowed myself to believe that maybe this was the turning point I'd been desperately hoping for. But as we pulled up to the airport, I noticed Derek kept checking his watch and seemed increasingly anxious. When I asked if everything was okay, he just said he wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to get through security. Mom was unusually quiet during the last few minutes of the drive, but I attributed it to travel nerves. I had no idea I was about to experience the most devastating betrayal of my young life. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way Mom avoided eye contact during that last conversation the night before. How Derek's questions about school felt more like he was gathering information than showing genuine interest. The fact that they'd insisted on packing my bag separately from theirs, saying it would be easier to manage at the airport. But in my desperate hope to finally have a real family, I ignored every red flag and walked into the trap they'd so carefully set for me. The moment we stepped out of the car at LAX, I sensed something was wrong. Derek immediately started pulling suitcases from the trunk with an urgency that seemed excessive for a leisurely cruise departure. Mom was checking her phone constantly and kept glancing at Derek with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I reached for my suitcase, Derek quickly grabbed it and said he'd handle all the luggage. "Let's get you checked in first, Emma," Mom said, guiding me toward the terminal. Her voice had a strange quality to it, too bright, too forced. "We want to make sure you have everything you need for your trip." "Our trip," I corrected, but she didn't respond. As we approached the check-in counter, I noticed Derek was only carrying my bag. "Where are your suitcases?" I asked. "Oh, we're checking in separately," Mom said quickly. "Different reservation systems. You know how complicated travel can be." The lie should have been obvious, but I was so focused on the excitement of finally taking a family vacation that I didn't question it. The woman at the check-in counter looked at my ticket and then glanced at Mom and Derek with confusion. "This is an unaccompanied minor ticket," she said. "Are the parents not traveling?" My heart stopped. "What do you mean, unaccompanied minor?" Mom's face went pale, but Derek stepped forward with a practiced smile. "There's been a slight change of plans," he said smoothly. "My wife and I have a family emergency that's going to prevent us from traveling, but we didn't want Emma to miss out on her birthday cruise." The words hit me like a physical blow. I turned to stare at Mom, waiting for her to correct Derek's lie, to explain that this was all some kind of mistake. Instead, she looked down at her hands and said nothing. "Mom?" My voice cracked on the word. "What's he talking about? We're all going together, remember?" "Honey," she finally said, still not meeting my eyes, "Derek's right. Something came up at the last minute and we can't make the trip. But you're going to have such an amazing time and you'll get to experience everything we talked about." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that for a moment I couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't a family emergency. This was a calculated plan to get rid of me. They had spent weeks preparing me for this cruise, not because they wanted to include me, but because they wanted me gone. "You planned this," I whispered, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. "You never intended to come with me." Derek shifted uncomfortably, but Mom finally looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Emma, please understand. Derek and I need some time alone to really solidify our marriage. We've been so busy with work and adjustments, and we just need a few weeks to reconnect without any distractions." Distractions. She called her own daughter a distraction. "So you're sending me away? Alone? For my 15th birthday?" The hurt in my voice was unmistakable, and several people in line behind us were starting to stare. "It's not forever," Mom said desperately. "It's just 10 days. You'll have such an adventure, and when you get back, things will be better. Derek and I will have had time to sort everything out, and we can start fresh as a family." But Derek's expression told a different story. He wasn't looking at this as a temporary solution. He was looking at it like he was finally getting what he'd wanted all along. Me out of the picture. The check-in agent looked increasingly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding at her counter. I need to verify that the minor has all necessary documentation and emergency contacts, she said professionally, trying to move the process along. As Mom handed over my passport and the cruise paperwork, I realized just how much planning had gone into this betrayal. They had booked me a solo cabin, arranged for unaccompanied minor services, and even prepaid for meals and activities. This wasn't a last-minute decision. This had been the plan all along. How long have you been planning this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom couldn't answer, but Derek had no such hesitation. We thought it would be a nice surprise, he said. Most kids your age would be thrilled to go on a cruise by themselves. Most kids my age haven't been systematically excluded from their own family for 2 years, I shot back, finally finding my voice. And most mothers don't lie to their children about family vacations just to get rid of them. Emma, please, Mom pleaded. Don't make this harder than it has to be. We're doing this because we love you and want what's best for our family. What's best for your family, I corrected. I'm clearly not part of that anymore. The truth hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Mom started crying, but they weren't tears of regret. They were tears of frustration that I wasn't making this easier for her. Derek put his arm around her shoulders, the gesture making it clear whose comfort was his priority. As the gate agent finished processing my ticket, I realized I had 2 choices, cause a scene and refuse to go, or take this opportunity to get away from people who clearly didn't want me around. The decision was easier than it should have been. Fine, I said, taking my boarding pass. I'll go on your cruise. But don't expect me to pretend this is some generous gift. We both know what this really is. Mom reached out to hug me goodbye, but I stepped back. Don't, I said. If you want me gone, then I'm gone. But don't pretend this is about love when we both know it's about convenience. As I walked toward security with my single suitcase, I heard Mom crying behind me. But Derek's voice was clear as day. She'll be fine, Linda. Kids are more resilient than you think. And we'll finally have the honeymoon we never got to take. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't temporary, and things would never go back to the way I'd hoped they could be. Walking through TSA security alone at 15 was surreal. The officers were kind but professional, treating me like any other unaccompanied minor they processed daily. But I wasn't just any other kid. I was a daughter who'd just been abandoned by her own mother for a luxury vacation with her new husband. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were probably heading to some expensive resort while I was being shipped off on what was supposed to be my birthday cruise. The flight to Miami gave me 3 hours to process what had just happened. I sat in my window seat, staring at the clouds below, and felt something shift inside me. The hurt was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else, a cold, calculating anger that surprised me. Mom and Derek thought they were so clever, getting rid of the inconvenient stepdaughter so they could play house without interruptions. They had no idea they'd just made the biggest mistake of their lives. When I boarded the cruise ship, the teen counselor, Jessica, immediately took me under her wing. She was probably 22, with the kind of enthusiastic energy that cruise lines loved, and she seemed genuinely excited to have a solo teen passenger. Emma, she said, checking my name off her list. I've been looking forward to meeting you. It's not often we get such an independent young woman traveling alone. Yeah, well, it wasn't exactly my choice, I muttered. Jessica's expression softened. Family stuff. I nodded, not trusting myself to explain without crying. Well, she said, linking her arm through mine, sometimes the best adventures happen when we least expect them. Let me show you to your cabin, and then I'll introduce you to some other kids who are going to make this the best 10 days of your life. She wasn't wrong. Within hours, I'd met a group of teenagers whose families were scattered throughout the ship, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could just be myself. There was Marcus, whose divorced parents were trying to prove they could still do family vacations together. Spoiler, they couldn't. Sarah, whose wealthy grandmother had brought the entire extended family on the cruise and was determined to force family bonding through scheduled activities. And Jake, whose parents were celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary by essentially ignoring their kids for 10 days. We became an instant squad of misfit kids, united by the shared experience of being afterthoughts on our family's vacation plans. But unlike them, I was completely alone, which somehow made me the unofficial leader of our little group. They looked up to me for being brave enough to travel solo, not knowing that bravery had nothing to do with it. The first few days were actually incredible. Without Mom and Derek's presence constantly reminding me of how unwanted I was, I could finally relax and have fun. We tried every activity on the ship: rock climbing, mini golf, the team dance club, even karaoke, where I discovered I had a decent singing voice. For the first time in years, I was laughing genuine laughs and making real friends. But it was on the fourth day that everything changed. I was lying by the pool with Sarah when she got a text from her mom asking her to come back to their family suite. "My grandmother wants to show us pictures from her last cruise," Sarah groaned. "Want to come with me? She's got this incredible penthouse suite that you have to see." I agreed, mostly because I was curious about how the other half lived on cruise ships. Sarah's family had booked one of the ship's most expensive accommodations, a 2-level suite with a private balcony, butler service, and enough space for their family of 8. As we walked through the ship's luxury level, I couldn't help but notice how different this section felt from the standard cabins where I was staying. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Through the window of the ship's exclusive restaurant, the one that required special reservations and cost extra, I saw them. Mom and Derek, sitting at an intimate table for 2, raising champagne glasses and a toast. Mom was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, something expensive and elegant that Derek had obviously bought her. They were both laughing at something on Derek's phone, looking like the picture-perfect honeymoon couple. They weren't dealing with a family emergency. They weren't at home missing me and wishing they could have come. They were on the same damn ship, living it up in luxury while I was in a basic cabin believing I was alone. The betrayal hit me like a tsunami. It wasn't enough that they'd lied to get rid of me. They'd actually brought me along as cover for their own romantic getaway. I was the perfect alibi. If anyone asked why Derek's stepdaughter wasn't joining them for dinner or activities, they could say I was off with the teen program. Meanwhile, they were free to enjoy all the adult amenities without the inconvenience of actually parenting. Sarah noticed I'd stopped walking. "Emma, you look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, watching my mother and her husband celebrate what was clearly their real honeymoon, while I'd spent 4 days believing I was on some kind of solo adventure cruise. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "That's my mom," I finally whispered. Sarah looked confused. "What? Where?" I pointed toward the restaurant. "The woman in the blue dress. That's my mother. She told me she couldn't come on this cruise because of a family emergency." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? They're here? On this ship?" I nodded, feeling tears of rage burning behind my eyes. "They shipped me off to the teen program so they could have a romantic cruise without me getting in the way." That's when Sarah said something that changed everything. "My grandmother's suite has a perfect view of the adult pool deck. Want to do some reconnaissance?" You know what? I'm getting chills just thinking about this next part of the story, and I can tell by the way you're all leaning in that you're feeling it too. If you're invested in seeing how this family betrayal unfolds, and trust me, the revenge that's coming is absolutely spectacular, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because this story is about to take some twists that will leave you speechless. I see those likes climbing, and I love that you're all as outraged as I was in that moment. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you think Emma deserves justice, because what happens next is going to restore your faith in karma. Now, let's see exactly how deep this deception goes. Sarah's grandmother's suite was like something out of a movie. The penthouse-level cabin had floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound balcony, and a perfect view of the ship's exclusive adult areas. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah's grandmother, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who immediately sensed drama when Sarah explained my situation. "Let me get this straight," Mrs. Henderson said, adjusting her reading glasses as she studied Mom and Derek through her balcony's telescope. Yes, she actually had a telescope. "Your mother told you she couldn't afford to come on this cruise due to an emergency, but she's actually here living in luxury while you're staying in a basic cabin." That's exactly right, I confirmed, watching through the telescope as Derek fed Mom chocolate-covered strawberries by the adult-only pool. They put me in the teen program, so I wouldn't accidentally run into them during their romantic getaway. Mrs. Henderson's expression hardened. She'd raised 4 children and buried 1 husband, and she had zero tolerance for bad parenting. Well, that's absolutely despicable. Sarah, get your brother and cousins up here immediately. We're going to help Emma document every second of their little love fest. What happened next was like having my own personal team of private investigators. Sarah's extended family consisted of 3 teenagers with expensive cameras, 1 college-aged cousin who was majoring in digital media, and Mrs. Henderson, who turned out to be a retired family court mediator with a vindictive streak. They were all appalled by my situation and immediately invested in helping me gather evidence. Over the next 3 days, we conducted the most thorough surveillance operation in cruise ship history. Sarah's cousin Jake had professional photography equipment and started taking long-range photos of Mom and Derek at every romantic dinner, couples massage, and private cabana session. Sarah's brother Marcus was a tech genius who figured out how to track their movements through the ship's app system, which showed what activities they'd booked and when. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson used her charm and substantial tip money to befriend various staff members who were more than happy to share information about the lovely honeymoon couple in the premium suite. Through her network of cruise employees, we learned that Mom and Derek had booked the most expensive package available, a luxury suite with butler service, unlimited specialty dining, premium beverage packages, and exclusive shore excursions that cost more than most people's mortgages. They're spending approximately $15,000 on this cruise, Mrs. Henderson announced during one of our evening strategy meetings in her suite. Not including the airfare, shopping, and spa treatments your mother has been charging to their room. The number hit me like a slap. $15,000. Meanwhile, my birthday cruise cabin cost maybe $800 total, and I was eating at the buffet because I couldn't afford the specialty restaurants. But the real breakthrough came when Sarah's cousin Emma, yes, we had the same name, which made our spy operation confusing, but somehow more bonded, managed to overhear Mom and Derek talking at the ship's wine bar. Emma had positioned herself at a nearby table with her laptop, pretending to do homework while actually recording their conversation on her phone. I can't believe how well this worked out. Derek's voice came through clearly on the recording. Emma's completely buying the family emergency story, and we finally get the honeymoon we deserved. Mom's laugh made my stomach turn. I was worried she'd figure it out, but the teen program keeps her so busy, she doesn't even question why we're not texting her constantly. This is the first time in 2 years I've been able to relax without worrying about her needs. Well, she's 15 now, Derek replied. Old enough to be independent. Honestly, Linda, I think this cruise might show you how much easier life could be if she wasn't around so much. Maybe it's time to consider other living arrangements. What do you mean? Mom asked. Boarding school. Or maybe she could live with your sister in Portland. I know Emma thinks of this as temporary, but why can't it be permanent? We could travel like this all the time, Linda. No schedules revolving around a teenager's needs, no guilt about leaving her out of adult activities. Just us, living the life we deserve. The recording continued with Mom agreeing that maybe Derek was right, that perhaps they'd been too accommodating to my needs, and that this cruise was showing them what their marriage could be like without the complications of a teenage stepdaughter. I listened to that recording 3 times before the rage settled into something cold and calculating. They weren't just lying about this cruise, they were planning to get rid of me permanently. Derek was systematically convincing my mother that her own daughter was an obstacle to their happiness, and apparently, it was working. Mrs. Henderson watched me process the recording with the keen eye of someone who'd spent decades mediating family disputes. Emma, she said gently, I've seen a lot of ugly custody battles and family betrayals in my career, but this is particularly cruel. Your mother is allowing her new husband to manipulate her into abandoning her parental responsibilities. What can I do about it? I asked. I'm 15. Nobody listens to 15-year-olds. Oh, my dear girl, Mrs. Henderson smiled, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw something that looked like justice in her eyes. You'd be surprised how much power you actually have. Especially when you have documentation, witnesses, and a very angry grandmother with connections in family court. That night, as I lay in my basic cabin listening to the ship's engine humming beneath me, I realized something had fundamentally changed. I wasn't the same naive 15-year-old who'd believed her mother's lies at LAX. I was someone who'd been betrayed, documented the betrayal, and was now ready to do something about it. The scared little girl who just wanted her mommy's love was gone. In her place was someone who understood that sometimes you have to fight for yourself because no one else will. And thanks to Sarah's family, I now had the evidence and allies I needed to make sure Mom and Derek's perfect little fantasy came crashing down around them. The remaining days of the cruise flew by as we perfected our documentation. We had photos, recordings, receipts we'd managed to obtain through Mrs. Henderson's staff connections, and testimony from multiple witnesses who'd seen Mom and Derek's elaborate deception firsthand. But more importantly, I had a plan that was going to teach them both exactly what happens when you betray someone who's got nothing left to lose. The last night of the cruise, Mrs. Henderson helped me plan what she called the reckoning. We'd gathered enough evidence to destroy Mom and Derek's entire narrative, and now it was time to confront them with the truth. But Mrs. Henderson, with her years of family court experience, had taught me that the best confrontations happen when your opponents think they're in control. Never let them see you coming, she advised as we reviewed our strategy one final time. Let them believe they've gotten away with their deception right up until the moment you reveal you know everything. The ship's final formal dinner was the perfect opportunity. Mom and Derek had reservations at the most exclusive restaurant on board, the same one where Sarah and I had first spotted them. Meanwhile, I was supposed to be at the teen farewell party in the youth center. The plan was beautifully simple. I would appear at their romantic dinner with all the evidence we'd gathered, in front of a restaurant full of witnesses. I dressed carefully that night, choosing the nicest dress Mom had bought me for this family cruise. The irony of wearing her purchase to confront her lies wasn't lost on me. Sarah's entire family had positioned themselves throughout the restaurant as backup, Mrs. Henderson at a corner table with her camera ready, the cousins scattered around with their phones, and Sarah herself at the bar where she could record everything that was about to unfold. At exactly 8:30, I walked into the restaurant and approached their table. Mom and Derek were sharing a dessert, feeding each other tiramisu and laughing intimately. Derek had his hand on Mom's thigh, and she was wearing earrings I'd never seen before, clearly another purchase from their secret luxury cruise. "Hi, Mom," I said, standing directly beside their table. The color drained from Mom's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Derek's fork clattered onto his plate, and the tiramisu fell back onto the dish with a wet splat. The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the soft classical music playing throughout the restaurant. "Emma," Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" "Having dinner," I replied calmly. "On our family cruise. You remember, the one you couldn't come on because of that family emergency." Derek recovered first, his businessman instincts kicking in. "Emma, you shouldn't be in here. This restaurant is for adults only after 8 p.m. You need to go back to the teen center." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone, I checked the ship's policy. Accompanied minors are welcome until 10 p.m. And since my mother and stepfather are right here, I'd say I'm pretty well accompanied. Mom looked desperately around the restaurant, clearly realizing that their deception was about to become very public. Other diners were already starting to stare, drawn by the obvious family drama unfolding at table 12. "Emma, please," Mom said, trying to keep her voice low. "Let's not make a scene. We can talk about this later." "Talk about what?" I asked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "About how you told me you couldn't afford to come on this cruise due to a family emergency, while you were actually here the entire time living in a luxury suite." The effect was immediate. Conversations at surrounding tables stopped as people turned to watch our confrontation. The restaurant's elegant atmosphere suddenly felt charged with tension, and I could see Derek calculating how to minimize the damage to his reputation. "You don't understand the situation," Derek said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. We made a difficult decision that was best for everyone involved. Best for everyone. I pulled out my phone and played the recording of their wine bar conversation at full volume. Derek's voice filled the restaurant. Emma's completely buying the family emergency story, and we finally get the honeymoon we deserved. The gasp from nearby diners was audible. Mom buried her face in her hands, while Derek's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. But I wasn't done. Would you like to see the photos too? I continued, swiping through Jake's professional documentation of their romantic activities. Here's you getting couples massages while I was playing mini golf alone. Here's you feeding each other chocolate-covered strawberries while I was eating cafeteria food. And here's my personal favorite, you toasting your successful deception while I was crying myself to sleep in my basic cabin. Emma, stop, Mom pleaded, tears now flowing freely. Please, you're embarrassing us. I'm embarrassing you. The hurt and rage I'd been containing for 6 days finally exploded. You abandoned your 15-year-old daughter at an airport, lied about why you couldn't come on this cruise, and then spent $15,000 on a luxury honeymoon while I ate alone every night thinking I was on some kind of solo adventure. But I'm embarrassing you. The entire restaurant had gone silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, watching this family drama unfold like a live soap opera. I could see Mrs. Henderson in my peripheral vision, documenting everything with her camera, while Sarah recorded from the bar. Mom was sobbing openly now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. Emma, you don't understand. Derek and I needed this time together. We haven't had a real honeymoon, and we thought. You thought you could dump me somewhere and pretend I didn't exist, I finished. Well, congratulations, Mom. Mission accomplished. But here's what you didn't think about. What happens when I go home and tell everyone exactly what kind of mother abandons her child for a luxury vacation? Derek's businessman facade finally cracked. You ungrateful little brat, he hissed. Do you have any idea how much money we spent on this cruise for you? You should be thanking us, not causing a scene. $800, I said calmly. You spent $800 on my basic cabin and buffet meals. Meanwhile, you spent $15,000 on yourselves. Should I really be grateful for the scraps? The maitre d' approached our table, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private, he suggested diplomatically. Oh no, I said, my voice carrying clearly throughout the restaurant. This conversation is exactly where it needs to be. Because everyone should know what Derek Morrison from Morrison Luxury Auto thinks about family values. And what Linda Morrison thinks about motherhood. I watched Derek's face go pale as I used their full names. His business reputation was everything to him, and I just connected his name to child abandonment in front of dozens of witnesses who would undoubtedly share this story. Mom stood up shakily, reaching for my arm. Emma, please. Let's go back to the room and talk about this properly. I stepped back from her touch. Which room, Mom? Your luxury suite with the butler service, or my basic cabin where I've been staying alone for 6 days while you lied to my face. We never lied, Derek started, but I cut him off. I have recordings of you both admitting this was all planned. I have photos of you celebrating getting rid of me. I have receipts showing exactly how much you spent on yourselves versus how much you spent on me. And I have witnesses who heard you discussing making this abandonment permanent. The last part hit Mom like a physical blow. She sat back down heavily, realizing that I'd heard their conversation about boarding school and sending me to live with relatives. Emma, she whispered, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I replied. You chose him over me, and now you're trying to find ways to make that choice permanent. Well, here's some news for both of you. I'm done making it easy for you. I pulled out a business card Mrs. Henderson had given me earlier. This is the contact information for a family law attorney in Los Angeles. Mrs. Henderson in the corner booth over there is a retired family court mediator who's been watching this whole situation unfold. She says what you've done constitutes child abandonment and emotional abuse. Derek's eyes darted to Mrs. Henderson, who gave him a little wave from her table. The blood drained from his face as he realized the implications. Emma, you're being dramatic, Mom said desperately. We're your family. We can work this out. No, I said firmly. You made your choice when you decided Derek's comfort was more important than your daughter's well-being. You made your choice when you lied to me for weeks about this cruise. And you made your choice when you started planning to get rid of me permanently. I looked around the restaurant at all the faces staring at us, families with their own teenagers, couples planning their futures, elderly people who'd probably raised children themselves. Everyone here tonight has witnessed what happens when parents choose selfishness over their children. Make sure you remember their faces when you're thinking about your own families. The walk back to my cabin felt like the longest journey of my life, but for the first time in years, I felt powerful. I wasn't the scared, abandoned little girl anymore. I was someone who'd stood up for herself and refused to be discarded quietly. Mrs. Henderson found me an hour later, knocking gently on my cabin door. "How are you feeling, dear?" she asked, settling into the small chair by my bed. "Like I just burned down my entire family," I admitted. "Good," she said firmly. "Sometimes you have to burn down what's broken before you can build something healthy. And Emma, what they did to you was very, very broken." She handed me a folder thick with documentation. Photos, recordings, witness statements, and my professional assessment of the situation. "When you get home, you're going to need this." "What happens now?" I asked. Mrs. Henderson smiled grimly. "Now, my dear, your mother and stepfather learn that actions have consequences. And you learn that you're stronger than you ever imagined." When we disembarked in Miami the next morning, Mom and Derek were waiting for me at the terminal. They looked like they'd aged years overnight. Mom's eyes were puffy from crying, and Derek's usual confident demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled panic. The confrontation in the restaurant had clearly shaken them more than I'd expected. "Emma," Mom said as I approached with my single suitcase, "we need to talk." "No," I replied calmly, "we don't. You've had 2 years to talk to me like I mattered. That opportunity is over." Derek stepped forward, his businessman instincts making one last attempt at damage control. "Look, Emma, we all said things last night that we didn't mean. Why don't we just forget this whole misunderstanding and focus on moving forward as a family?" I almost laughed at his audacity. "Misunderstanding? Derek, I have recordings of you planning to get rid of me permanently. That's not a misunderstanding, that's premeditated abandonment." The 3-hour flight back to LAX was the most uncomfortable journey of my life. We sat in coach. Apparently Derek's luxury budget had been exhausted by their secret honeymoon suite and barely spoke. Mom kept trying to start conversations about how we could fix things, but I had nothing left to say to her. The woman who'd raised me, who'd promised we'd get through Dad's death together, had chosen a man who saw me as an obstacle over her own daughter. When we got home to Derek's mansion, I went straight to my room and called the number Mrs. Henderson had given me. The family law attorney, Margaret Chin, agreed to see me that afternoon. Mrs. Henderson had already sent her all our documentation, and she was appalled by what she'd reviewed. "Emma," Ms. Chin said during our consultation, "what your mother and stepfather did constitutes child abandonment under California law. The fact that they planned and executed this deception, then discussed making it permanent, gives us substantial grounds for legal action." "What kind of legal action?" I asked. "Well, you have several options. We could file for emancipation, which would give you legal independence from your mother. We could pursue custody modification if you have other family members willing to take guardianship. Or we could file charges for child abandonment and let the courts determine appropriate consequences." The idea of legal independence was terrifying, but also liberating. What would emancipation mean exactly? It would mean you're legally responsible for yourself, housing, education, finances, medical decisions. It's a big responsibility for a 15-year-old, but given your circumstances, it might be the best way to protect yourself from further emotional abuse. That evening, I told Mom and Derek about my meeting with the attorney. Derek exploded, threatening to sue me for defamation and emotional distress, which would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. Mom just cried and begged me to reconsider, promising things would be different. "Different how?" I asked. "Are you going to divorce Derek? Are you going to choose your daughter over your husband? Because those are the only changes that would actually make a difference." Mom couldn't answer, and her silence told me everything I needed to know. The legal process took 6 months, during which time I lived in Derek's house like a stranger. Mom and Derek tried various strategies to get me to drop the case: bribery, guilt trips, threats, and promises of reform, but Mrs. Henderson had taught me well. I documented every interaction, every broken promise, every moment when Derek showed his true feelings about having me in his home. The breakthrough came when Derek made a crucial mistake. Frustrated by the ongoing legal situation and the damage to his business reputation, word of the cruise incident had spread through his social circles. He confronted me one evening when Mom was at her book club. "This has gone far enough, Emma," he said, cornering me in the kitchen. "You're going to call off this legal nonsense, or I'm going to make your life so miserable you'll beg to leave." "Really?" I said, pulling out my phone and starting a voice recording. "Tell me more about how you plan to make my life miserable." He fell for it completely. For the next 10 minutes, Derek detailed exactly how he planned to isolate me, cut off my resources, and make me so uncomfortable that I'd agree to go live with relatives. He talked about convincing Mom to send me to boarding school, limiting my access to friends and activities, and essentially making me a prisoner in his house until I turned 18. "You see, Emma," he concluded, "I don't need to abuse you or hurt you. I just need to make it clear that you don't belong here, and eventually, you'll leave on your own." "That's interesting," I said, stopping the recording. "Because what you just described is called coercive control, and it's illegal when used against minors." Derek's face went white as he realized what he'd just admitted to on recording. The next day, Ms. Chen filed for an emergency hearing, presenting Derek's recorded threats as evidence that I was in immediate danger. The family court judge, a stern woman in her 60s who reminded me of Mrs. Henderson, was not impressed with Derek's behavior. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Patricia Williams said during the hearing, "you've essentially confessed to planning the systematic emotional abuse of a minor child. Are you aware that coercive control is a form of domestic violence under California law?" Derek's expensive attorney tried to minimize the recording, but the judge had heard enough. She granted my petition for emancipation on the spot, with the provision that I would receive financial support from Mom until I turned 18, support that would come from her separate assets, not Derek's money. But the real justice came a week later, when Mrs. Henderson called with news that made everything worthwhile. "Emma, dear," she said, her voice bubbling with satisfaction, "you'll never guess what happened to Derek's business." It turned out that several of Derek's wealthy clients had been on that cruise ship, dining in the same restaurant where our confrontation had taken place. Word of his treatment of his stepdaughter had spread through his exclusive clientele like wildfire. The video that Sarah had taken of our confrontation had somehow made its way onto social media, where it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Derek's luxury car dealership, which depended entirely on wealthy clients who valued family and reputation, lost over 60% of its customer base within a month. The man who had built his success on presenting himself as a family-oriented businessman was suddenly known throughout Beverly Hills as the guy who abandoned his teenage stepdaughter on a cruise ship. The business collapsed within 6 months. Derek had to sell the mansion, the cars, and most of their luxury possessions just to pay his debts. Mom, faced with the choice between her daughter and a financially ruined husband who destroyed his own reputation, finally filed for divorce. "I should have chosen you from the beginning," she told me during one of our supervised visits. "I let Derek convince me that I deserved a different kind of life, but I already had everything I needed. I had you. It was too little, too late for our relationship, but it was something." Today, at 29, I'm a successful family law attorney myself, inspired by Margaret Chin and Mrs. Henderson to help other kids who find themselves abandoned by the people who should protect them. I've been married for 3 years to a wonderful man who understands that family means never making someone choose between love and loyalty. Mom and I have a cordial relationship now. She remarried a kind widower who already had grown children, and she's learned to be a grandmother to my 2-year-old daughter. But we both know that some betrayals change you forever, and our relationship will never be what it was before Derek entered our lives. As for Derek, last I heard, he was managing a used car lot in Phoenix and living in a studio apartment. The man who once thought he could discard a 15-year-old girl like an inconvenience learned that some people fight back harder than you expect. The funny thing about karma is that it doesn't always strike immediately, but when it does, it's usually more thorough than anything you could have planned yourself. Derek thought he was getting rid of an obstacle to his perfect life with my mother. Instead, he created his own worst enemy, someone who understood exactly how cruel people could be and was determined to make sure they faced consequences for their actions. Mrs. Henderson taught me that strength isn't about never being hurt, it's about refusing to let the people who hurt you get away with it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planning elaborate schemes. Sometimes it's simply refusing to disappear quietly when someone tries to erase you. So here's my question for all of you who've stuck with me through this entire crazy story. Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet to keep the peace or standing up for yourself even when it meant burning bridges? Because I want to hear about it. Drop your stories in the comments below, whether it's family drama, workplace betrayal, or just someone who underestimated your ability to fight back. Hit that like button if you believe karma eventually catches up with people who think they can treat others like they're disposable. Subscribe for more stories about justice served and people who learned the hard way that actions have consequences. And please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that 15-year-olds can be more powerful than adults give them credit for. Thank you all for listening to my story and for understanding that sometimes the best families are the ones we choose for ourselves. Life has a funny way of showing us that the people who try to throw us away often end up being the ones who get discarded in the end. Here's to standing up for yourself, fighting for what's right, and never letting anyone convince you that you're not worth fighting for. Until next time, remember, karma doesn't forget, and neither should you.